In 1973, a cultural anthropologist named Ernest Becker published a book called The Denial of Death. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It sold modestly. And then, for 2 decades, it was largely ignored by the mainstream intellectual world, treated as an interesting but eccentric contribution to existential philosophy rather than as the foundational insight into human behavior that it actually was. The core argument of the book was simple and, once stated, almost impossible to dismiss. Human beings are the only animals aware of their own mortality, and the entirety of human culture, religion, art, politics, social hierarchy, and the ceaseless accumulation of wealth and status is, at its deepest level, a response to the terror of knowing that we are going to die. Becker called this terror existential anxiety, and he argued that it operates below the level of conscious awareness for most people most of the time. We do not walk around in a constant state of conscious fear of death. We have developed, both individually and collectively, elaborate systems of what Becker called immortality projects, ways of transcending our biological finitude by connecting ourselves to something that will outlast us. Religious belief promises literal immortality. Artistic creation promises a form of symbolic immortality, the work that outlives the maker. Political or military power promises the immortality of historical significance. And wealth, Becker argued, is one of the most powerful and most culturally sanctioned immortality projects available in secular modernity. The accumulation of money and assets is not just a rational response to material need. It is a bulwark against the terror of non-existence. This was a philosophical argument in 1973. By the early 1990s, it had become an empirical research program. A group of social psychologists, Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Piszczynski, were struck by Becker's argument and asked a question that nobody had thought to ask before. What happens to people's behavior when their awareness of death is experimentally activated? Can you measure the effect of mortality salience, the psychological term for the heightened awareness of one's own death, on specific behaviors? And if you can, what do those effects look like? The answer, which they documented over hundreds of studies across dozens of countries over more than 30 years, was that mortality salience has measurable, consistent, and often startling effects on a very wide range of human behaviors. They called their theoretical framework terror management theory, and it has become one of the most extensively tested theories in social psychology. The death awareness studies, as they came to be known, worked by a simple experimental protocol. One group of participants is asked to write briefly about what will happen to their body when they die and the emotions that the thought of their own death evokes. A control group writes about an unpleasant but non-mortal experience, dental pain, a difficult exam. Then both groups complete a series of tasks. And the differences between the groups are, reliably, striking. People in the mortality salience condition show increased in-group favoritism and out-group hostility. They show greater adherence to cultural norms and greater punitiveness toward norm violators. They show increased preference for strong, dominant leaders. They show increased religiosity. And, most relevant to this channel, they show dramatically increased materialism, increased desire for wealth and status goods, and increased actual spending behavior. In one of the most directly financially relevant studies in the terror management theory literature, participants who had been reminded of their mortality showed significantly higher stated willingness to pay for luxury goods, significantly higher preference for high-status brands over functional equivalents, and significantly higher actual spending in a simulated shopping task. The effect was not small. The mortality salience condition produced changes in spending intent that were large enough to be financially meaningful. Not a few percent, but substantial shifts in the amount and type of spending that people reported they wanted to do. The mechanism behind this effect connects directly to Becker's original argument. When awareness of death is activated, even briefly, even subliminally, the psychological systems that manage existential anxiety are mobilized. And one of the most powerful of those systems, in secular consumer culture, is the accumulation of wealth and the display of status. Having more
is, at the deepest psychological level, a way of being more, of asserting one's significance, one's permanence, one's claim on a world that will continue after the individual body has ceased to exist. The luxury purchase, the status symbol, the conspicuous display of financial success. All of these serve, in the framework of terror management theory,
as defenses against the terror of insignificance that death awareness produces. The implications are significant because death awareness is not a rare or artificially induced state. It is activated continuously by the ordinary experience of modern life. News coverage of accidents, illness, and death, funerals and bereavements, medical appointments and diagnoses. The simply experience of aging and watching the people around you age. The background awareness of global risks, pandemics, climate change, geopolitical instability, that modern media makes impossible to fully ignore. Every one of these is, in the framework of terror management theory, a potential trigger for the mortality salience effect, and every one of them can, in the right conditions, produce a downstream impulse toward the compensatory consumption and status signaling that the research consistently documents. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 and 2021 provided, in retrospect, one of the largest natural experiments in the relationship between mortality salience and consumer behavior ever conducted. The pandemic activated mortality awareness at a scale and intensity that has no modern precedent, not just among people who were personally ill or bereaved, but across entire populations who were confronting, daily and unavoidably, the reality of mass death and personal vulnerability. The consumer behavior data from this period is, from a terror management theory perspective, almost textbook. Researchers studying consumer behavior during the pandemic found a pattern that was, on the surface, contradictory. On one hand, precautionary savings increased dramatically. Household saving rates in the United States, United Kingdom, and Europe reached historically high levels as people hunkered down and reduced discretionary spending. On the other hand, spending on certain specific categories increased dramatically and specifically in ways that terror management theory would predict. Spending on home improvement, the creation of a personal domain, a permanent mark on the world, surged. Spending on luxury goods increased among higher-income groups, with luxury brands reporting record sales in 2021 despite the economic disruption. Spending on experiences, particularly dramatic, bucket list-type experiences, surged as restrictions lifted, with luxury travel, fine dining, and premium entertainment reporting extraordinary demand. And the cryptocurrency and speculative investment boom of 2020 and 2021, in which millions of people made large, risky bets on highly speculative assets, has the hallmarks in the research literature of exactly the kind of significance-seeking, legacy-building behavior that terror management theory associates with activated mortality awareness. The advertising industry has understood the mortality salience effect intuitively for decades, even without the academic framework to describe it. The most effective advertising has always worked by connecting products to deep human needs rather than to functional features. And the deepest human need, according to both Becker's philosophical analysis and the empirical research of terror management theory, is the need for significance, permanence, and transcendence of mortality. This is why luxury brands do not advertise features. They advertise legacy, heritage, permanence, and the idea that the objects they sell will outlast their owners. It is why real estate marketing consistently invokes the language of legacy, building something that will be passed down, creating something permanent. It is why financial services advertising frequently evokes imagery of protecting what matters, securing the future, leaving something behind. All of these framings are, whether their creators know it or not, engaging the mortality salience mechanism. The relationship between death awareness and financial behavior also runs through the specific domain of estate planning and end-of-life financial decisions, an area that financial advisors consistently describe as the most psychologically resistant domain they work in. Despite the practical importance of wills, life insurance, and estate planning, the majority of adults in most wealthy countries do not have up-to-date wills, are underinsured, and have not had explicit conversations with their families about their financial wishes. The standard explanation for this is procrastination and inertia. The terror management theory explanation is more specific. The psychological avoidance of mortality-related tasks is not just general procrastination. It is a specific defense mechanism that protects people from the anxiety that confronting these tasks directly activates. Writing a will is, literally, writing about your own death. The psychological resistance to it is not irrational. It is the mortality management system doing its job, avoiding the full confrontation with finitude that these tasks require. Understanding all of this has both philosophical and practical implications. The philosophical implication is that the relationship between money and meaning in modern life is deeper and stranger than financial culture typically acknowledges. When we talk about financial goals, retirement savings, investment returns, wealth accumulation, we are talking about a layer of motivation that sits on top of something much older and much more fundamental. Underneath the spreadsheet is the question that every human being who has ever lived has had to answer. How do I make my life mean something in the face of the fact that it will end? Wealth, in modern consumer culture, is one of the most available answers to that question. It is not the only answer, and the research does not suggest it is the most effective one. But it is the most culturally visible and most commercially promoted one. And it shapes financial behavior at a level that most financial advice does not reach. The practical implication is simpler and more actionable. If you find yourself making large financial decisions, impulsive luxury purchases, dramatic investment bets, sudden desires to buy property or start businesses or make significant donations, in the aftermath of experiences that have activated mortality awareness, it is worth pausing to ask whether the financial decision is being driven by genuine strategic thinking or by the existential management system running in the background. The question is not whether the purchase is worthwhile. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the mortality-activated desire to do something significant or permanent or legacy building is pointing toward a genuinely important value that deserves to be acted on. The question is whether you are choosing or being driven, whether the decision is being made by the deliberate you or by the terrified, ancient, death-aware animal underneath. Both of them live in the same body and use the same bank account. Knowing which one is at the wheel at any given moment is the beginning of financial wisdom.